excited to have Marsha Cooke here today. So she's the Senior Vice President of Impact at Vice Media, and previously she was the Senior Vice President of Content Strategy and Community at Vice Media and spent 24 years at CBS, where she served as the Asia Bureau Chief, Senior Broadcast Producer for CBS News, Exec Editor of Content for CBSN, and VP of News Services for 200 plus CBS affiliates and international news partners. If everyone can mute, that would be awesome. Yeah, so Joe's going to talk a bit more about Coalition Z.
Yeah, so for those of you who are unfamiliar, we just want to give a quick intro to what Coalition Z is. This is our last workshop in Coalition Z's summer workshop series, but we'd love to keep you all looped in the coming weeks and months going into the school year. Coalition Z is a national student-led, policy-based organization that aims to influence the government with Generation Z's progressive values by electing progressive candidates we align with, influencing government with our policy platform, connecting young people to campaigns and elected officials, and producing informative events and doing voter registration. So we are really excited for you to join us. If you're interested, we are completely chapter based. We currently have chapters in 8 states in the country. So if you're interested in starting a chapter at your school, Durga's gonna drop the chapter form down in the chat. And you can really easily start a chapter and set up a call with us. But if you're just interested in getting involved, you can join our newsletter on our website or follow us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook at Coalition Z. She'll also put those actual in the chat. Sorry, I just forgot the word. There we go. But thank you all for joining us. We're gonna get into the event now.
Yeah, so we're going to start off with some guided questions. So Joe, do you want to take the first one?
So, why did you choose journalism as your career path, and how did you start your career, Marsha?
Okay, hi everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, and I know that you have a structure, and I'm going to try and respect it, but actually not so much. So before I begin to tell you about me, I'm going to tell you, since I'm taking my time to speak with you, I want something in return. I work for Vice Media, which is arguably one of the largest, if not the largest, youth-oriented media company in the world. We have about 2,500 employees. We're in 34 different countries, and I run Impact. I think it's probably safe to say that this year is the most important election year in the United States. There are plenty of other elections that are happening in other countries, which we can talk about as well, maybe in another session. But if we think about this year, I want to tap your brains on how we can galvanize young people, which I am still, to vote. So as we go through this conversation, I'm going to ask that we break, and not break and go away, but break in the, questions about me, questions about journalism, questions about objectivity, questions about anything that sounds like that. And I'm going to ask you to be my focus group to help me understand, because as Impact, as the lead person for Impact, one of my pillars, the dreaded P word, is civic engagement, which is voting. I have 2 major pillars this year. One is climate and the other is voting. And they are really tied together this year more so than ever before. So I'll give you my little kind of brief history on me and how I ended up being where I am today, and then maybe 1 or 2 questions so that by the halfway mark, I can start tapping your brains on how we can be better at what we do, because I'm going to hope that a bunch of you, maybe even all of you, know my company and have either watched our content, read our content, listened to our content. So I want you to tell me how I can do what is so important this year even better, whether it be through our social channels. We're big on Snap or Twitter or Facebook, or is it a piece, a news piece on Vice News Tonight? Is it a short form documentary? So just keep that in your mind that when I come back at the halfway mark, a couple questions, and then we're going to switch gears and I'm putting you guys to work. Copy that? All right. I'm Marsha Cooke. I'm a Jamaican American. I was born in New York City. I grew up in the Bronx. And television was always my friend. My sister is 20 years older than me, so she was more like my mom. So I basically read a lot and watched television a lot. And the kinds of things that I watched tended to be news shows, either news shows or sports shows. So my heroes were local news reporters in New York City growing up. And in high school, I stalked local news reporters, full disclosure. I baked cookies and I stood in front of NBC Rockefeller Center until I saw the two people that I loved the most in the world at that time, two local anchors, until they allowed me to go up into the NBC newsroom so I could see how the sausage was made. And my cookies were really good. So just as a sense, I think I came out of the womb, a sense of me. I came out of the womb always wanting to do what I do now. My heroes were folks that you probably don't know, but you've heard about: Walter Cronkite, Leslie Stahl, who's still around on 60 Minutes, a local Black female reporter named Melba Tolliver. It's what I always wanted to do. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to work in television, and I wanted to tell stories that other people either didn't have the courage to do or just didn't know how to do. So I went to Temple University. I studied journalism and broadcast communications. I met a professor who basically looked at me and said, "You're going to be a producer." And for some reason, I listened to her. And she, at this particular stage in my life, I am in my 50s, she is still my mentor. So I also have a story to say something about the importance of mentorship. And she was a longtime journalist, opinion writer for the Philadelphia Daily News, and way back in the dark ages for her, she was a correspondent for CNN and a local station in Detroit. So I basically wanted to do stories and report on people and places that I felt were underrepresented. And I saw that as an opportunity for me in a way that I really can't put words around in some way. It was just, I don't want to say it was a calling because it makes me sound like I'm in some sort of cult, but it was something that I loved the power, not just of the pen, even though now that's turned into a laptop, but the power of holding a microphone. And that microphone allowed me to walk up. Do you know how much power this microphone has? I mean, as of late, people can say to someone like me, or of course, and have us run away and not want to answer our questions because we're fake news. But that doesn't always happen, in all sincerity. So I found that by holding the microphone and simply walking up to people and asking the who, what, where, and why, I had an enormous amount of power. And I got people to talk about things in ways that I believe they had not spoken about before. So that is an extremely long-winded answer to your question of why do I do what I do and how did I get started? Did I do all right there?
Yeah, so as you know, like we are pretty involved in one of our like pillars is a voter registration and engagement, and like we'd love to continue the work with you all in the future whenever. I know you have Impact is doing so much already, but working with you all on that, we'd absolutely love that. So our next question is kind of like a different turn, but what responsibilities does the media have when covering politics, and how does the media, in your view, does the media shape public perception of politics and global affairs?
Well, I mean, we play an enormous role. I mean, it's very old school, but I still think of what I do as a public service. And I think that it is enormously important to continue to inform our audience about facts, about what's happening in their world, and try to tell it in a way that's fair and balanced. Now, I'm going to say straight up, because you might Google me and find that I have said this. There is one area that I myself and the company, thankfully, I work for, believe we don't have to be that balanced, is climate. And I will not like put a climate denier on the air, on and on. I will acknowledge that they exist, and I will acknowledge what it is that they have to say, but I'm not in the business, and that's what's great about Impact, because I'm not a full-time working journalist anymore. I'm an executive. So I'm trying to shape our content. I'm trying to make sure that our company is purpose-driven. So when we think about our political coverage, if we look at what has happened over the last couple of months, from the pandemic to the Black Lives Matter movement, and an awakening, if you will, and a reckoning around racial and social injustice, it is our responsibility to tell those stories and to find different ways to tell those stories to make people or help people understand what is systemic racism in our country. So that is a responsibility that and I think many of the people that I work with, I live in Midtown, so I'm really sorry about the fire trucks. I think that's a responsibility. You have no idea what it was like living here in March. Oh my God, because there's a hospital not too far away. It was insane. And no other vehicles. It was only police cars. I think that I'm not going to say anything about this current administration, because we know. So I think that from the Vice perspective, and I'm going to only speak about Vice in terms of it's what I do now and it's what I'm experiencing now, our obligation is to make people smart and help them understand what's happening in their world today. So if we can explain and do piece after piece after piece about the United States Postal Service, that is a good thing. That is in the center of our political conversation. That is not only about politics today, because we've had it acknowledged that it is an attempt to slow down mail service that would include ballots that would give people the hard-earned right to vote. So it's a twofer. It's politics, it's helping people understand what's happening in our country in terms of this current administration, but it is also explaining and constantly telling stories about not only National Voter Registration Day and early voting, but also the importance of voting. So pause here and let me ask, how many of you are at an age where you can pre-register to vote? And if you have, how many have yes? And the rest of you are just not of age yet, correct? Basically, all right. My iPad isn't large enough for me to see everybody. I don't have that gallery view. Talk to me a little bit about what each of you, either individually or Coalition C, are doing right now to enlighten. I'm of age, thank you, Matt Olivier. What are you doing to get that vote out or to raise awareness? Somebody take the floor.
Yeah, in terms of Coalition Z, Charlotte or Josephine, do you want to take this one? I've been talking a lot, so. Okay.
You can go.
Okay. So for Coalition Z, like what we've been doing is obviously a lot of the stuff we were doing got stunted, COVID, of course, but it was, now that it was enacted in January 2020, since we're largely like New York based, we hosted a ton of pre-registration drives in the city and ran them in our local chapters. But for years we've been trying to host Student Voter Registration Day to get high schools themselves hosting voter registration drives and then also pledging to vote for the younger kids. But one of the biggest hurdles is that local government largely does not provide materials, provide resources, and a lot of it is on the backs of students themselves to host these at their own schools. So, but right now, in terms of especially thinking about November, where it's mostly going to be online voter registration outreach and like publicity, and many campaigns and working with other grassroots organizations, because obviously a lot is not being done by those in power, so taking it upon ourselves. But yeah.
What do you think I, as the head of impact at a major media company, needs to do or think about to find people and engage people who are not as enlightened as you, but are of the same age group, whether it be through the spoken word, written, a piece of video? What do you think? I just saw a question, but I'm afraid to touch this because I'm sure I'll mess it up again.
Maria, if you want to unmute, please feel free, since you raised
Hi.
your hand.
So I guess a way to reach everyone, I feel like we're all kind of aware, but social media, at least nowadays, has such a strong presence and everyone really is on it. So if there's a way that you could try to like set either I don't know, because Instagram has ways that you can set ads geared towards users or something, right? So I feel like if you can reach teens through Instagram, that might be the easiest way to give them reliable information, because we do get so much fake news from like social media, like TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. So many of the organizations, they don't think about the whole picture. It's just really partisan views, like be it Republican, liberal, Democrat, or conservative, like everything that's too biased. I guess people get confused. So I guess finding a way through social media to get like a well-written, easy to comprehend stuff, like the New York Times and the Economist are really great, really nice information, but it's not accessible to everyone. Not everyone can get through all of the argot that's in those newspapers. So I feel like that might be a good way to start.
Sam, what did you mean about resources?
Oh, like Instagram, they like I by accident made my account into like a business account for like 3 seconds, and it lets you kind of like see what type of people see your page. But not only that, like Instagram ads lets you target a certain demographic, I think. Unless I'm mistaken, I might be wrong.
All I meant was all I meant was, I don't know, I guess articles, or I do watch the Vice News Snapchat story a lot.
That's good.
Like one of the best ways to get information out, honestly, because it's like right there, and it's like you can go directly from like conversations and like people's lives to, little information tidbit things. But I don't know, just like a lot of people who aren't politically engaged, or like they don't really want to talk about the national level, and then they're like, well, there's nothing else to it, right? So like information or little, I don't know, little digital media things.
Someone said through entertainment, and that's a really interesting point for me, because I'm personally torn when I sit with the social team, and it's kind of like, have we reached this zenith of the power of celebrity? And are you and your peers kind of overhearing a Donald Glover or someone else telling you about the power of voting? Are you more swayed by having a celebrity speak to you about something like this with maybe some decent information? Or is it just better to have facts and figures and some clean information that you can just kind of swipe up or swipe across or read as either part of your social feed or a good old-fashioned newspaper? But I know print is so 1980. What do you think?
Natalie, if you want to unmute, I saw your hand was raised.
Yeah, first I would like to say that I think celebrity, for the people who tend not to be very politically engaged, is a good way to reach them, as they might, find entertainment and other sources like that. But I was also going to say that outreach should also depend on the content, as in like people who aren't very politically engaged probably aren't going to care about, you know, VP picks or like this. I can't really speak to what they don't care about. I'm just saying that I'm sure they would love to consume media about politics that doesn't sound like something that's coming from CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, or just anything they associate with coming from the political establishment, because they don't care enough about politics to get on board with just, that MSNBC or CNN is telling them something. So they're tired of those stories and they want to hear something else about politics, and maybe hear voices that are typically ignored by those kinds of networks, and probably young voices especially.
Okay. What would you like to see if you were to go onto the vice.com site or vicenews.com and read stories that have to do with political campaigns or political activation? Do you want to hear personal stories from individuals, or do you want to just hear stories that are not breaking news, but breaking news? So what's happening, I'm obsessed with the USPS story, or, people people either in favor or against Kamala Harris as the VP pick. Stories around, whatever is happening at this moment involving the president and his cabinet. Are you more interested in hearing those stories of the impact of, as an example, the pandemic and homelessness or food insecurity through a straight narrative that just tells you what is the state of that particular area? Or do you want it told to you through a person who has been impacted? We would say through a character. What moves you when you read a news story?
I think for me personally, the straight narrative is very, it sits well with me when it has the context of a perspective of people that are ignored. So saying it includes a context of the increasing housing prices and how the minimum wage hasn't been increased in the same way. So I think stories that have that kind of context, that doesn't make homeless people out to be like individuals who deserve it, or make them the villains instead of that's what I'm trying to say. Just like stories that put in the context of systemic external influences.
Okay. Thank you for letting me pause there so I could learn a little bit about how you look at how the news industry tackles these kinds of issues in terms of what you'd like to see better reported. So I'll take a question.
We also have a lot of people that are raising their hand. If you want to come over here. And then just to update you on the chat, Michaela said, I feel like whatever it is, it has to be made as simple as possible, because I know so many people who are just more apathetic, but also kind of want to vote, but they just don't make the effort / know how to do it. Jade said, to add on to Sam's point, creating resources for government teachers who can share them to their classes, promoting a voter awareness day for remote classes. Maria said, I feel like the non-politically inclined teens might be more likely to click on something that's from a celebrity. If there's some post that's obviously backing a political agenda with stats / graphics, people might be less likely to click it in the first place because they might be disinterested. Omri said, I think advertisements for voter registration should have intentionally low production value. An individual talking about how COVID-19 has affected them and why they're thus motivated to register to vote. And then said,
that's great. Sorry. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, keep going.
So next we have Yana, and then Omri, and then we'll check back in with the raised hands, but we have a lot of them. So Yana, feel free to unmute.
Yeah, I was just going to say a little bit earlier, I think the kind of two goals that reporting on civic engagement, like overall, could accomplish for young people is first kind of getting apathetic people integrated and like wanting to vote, which I think things like celebrity kind of like endorsements for voting and personal narratives about how, for example, like how COVID has affected homeless people and mass evictions and things like that could hopefully get people excited about voting. But then I also think there's a huge chunk of young people who say like care about the climate crisis, but don't exactly understand like the difference between absentee voting and like how like early voting works, how you request an absentee ballot, what all the deadlines are. So I think even if it's like a very saturated area, I think like I think like a short and sweet article kind of breaking down all of those terms and like even giving people like a timeline of how to vote would be really helpful.
Okay. We're trying to, just as an aside, we're in partnership with Rock the Vote, even though that's also kind of old school. They have, I don't know, 3 million members. So I'll take their reach and then try and kind of grow that in some way. But yes, I think that we have to be more creative. Infographics are great, but I think you're right, saturation is definitely real. And I'm going to, Durga will give everyone, or put it in the chat, give you my work email, and just put in the subject box, Coalition Z. And for any big idea that you have, I want to hear it, and I want to see if I can implement it. And as long as you don't mind sharing your IP with me, then I'll do my best to see if there's, because we're also trying to innovate. And there have been a couple of polls by, Tom, he ran for president, he's a billionaire. Next Gen. Yeah, Tom Steyer. Next, they did, like, they've done 2 polls in the last 6 months, I think, about youth and voting apathy, and it's really bad. I mean, it's really bad. You are, as I said earlier, and I think I made someone on the call smile, you are the enlightened ones. There aren't that, I mean, there are a lot of you, but there are also a lot of you that are thinking, why bother? Because when we look at the system as it exists today, it certainly doesn't encourage faith or trust. It seems to say the swamp rules. Not funny, but sorry. But I really would like you to rip a page from whatever script you're working from and share some of the successes that you've had with your Coalition Z, and help me kind of think a little bit more creatively. I would say probably more specific to our social platforms on how we can do something a bit more to engage the people who are not like you. And how do we reach them? What do we say? Come back at me. And if you discover great ways to tell stories, because I'm assuming most of you also are super interested in journalism, that's why you wanted me to talk to you. At least I think so. Or am I just a friend of Durga's? Sorry. Tell me what you think. I would love a kind of feedback loop after you watch Vice News Tonight. If you don't have cable, which most people don't, it's fine. We put the entire show up the next day online. Oftentimes 2 or 3 pieces will be on your social feed. Come back and tell me what is missing from that show that you would have liked to see us do a better job at telling, or that we just missed altogether. Are we not? I think we're pretty darn diverse. I think that, you know, we go back into Louisville. How many people are going back into Louisville except when there's a march to really understand the fact that Breonna Taylor may have been killed because of an attempt to gentrify that neighborhood and push poor people out. And those kind of stings that are happening in neighborhoods like that are I forget what the phrase is called right now, but you can just, without a warrant, bust into a home. So those are stories that only happen when you keep going back, when you don't parachute in, as most of the news organizations do that I came out of, and do a piece for a minute 30. I can't say my name and my education in a minute 30. So it's something that you have to give time and you have to give resources to, and people don't want to support journalism. So you get blocks of individuals, like some of the Murdochs, as an example. I'm not throwing stones, but they have money so they can create a network. So where is the network for, and not MSNBC, I'm talking about the American Journalism Project, or increase funding for local newspapers, which is the core of our existence. If you care about journalism, if we don't support local journalism, we're hosed. That's why 2016 happened, because people were not on the ground to understand what was happening in swing states, or even forget about swing states, in states across the country, unless you were on the Acela corridor, New York, DC, or you were on the West Coast, Los Angeles, San Francisco, maybe Oregon. I think I just went off topic. Question.
I mean, I think what Vice does is so powerful because it's on the ground, and like so many of like the accessible like videos, and I think that's, at least for me, when I like use all of your services, is hearing that from, like you said, like going back to the source, but also about I've dropped Marsha's email in the chat for anyone who wants to get in touch, and Marsha, I'll also be in touch about a more concrete way of tapping into our members, because we have with our like national chapters, I'm sure it'll be good to get more of a wide, if we want to continue the focus group idea, we'll definitely be reaching out. So
yeah. So Durga, I really, really want to do that. And to everyone here, I wish I had a giant, I guess I could have done this anyway.
So yeah, we'll be in touch, and everyone just be tuned in. And oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I want to figure out more creative ways to utilize your brains. So, in a perfect world, would I want to turn over? I mean, maybe there's something that we can do with a Instagram takeover with Coalition Z. Maybe somewhere around National Registration Day or Early Vote Day. I don't know. That's an idea. It's been out. It's been done before. It's not terribly new or original. But I don't know. What's your membership base? How many states are you in? How many people are going to be involved? Tell me like tens of thousands. Okay, whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't care how many numbers you have. It's fine. Okay, I'm ready for another question.
I believe Ahmed was next. If he wants to go unmute himself.
So I remember that like a couple years ago when Republicans were threatening to overturn Obamacare, Vice did I watched a couple like short videos on YouTube that Vice did where I think they talked to like people who had opioid addictions, and people who would be individual people who would be directly affected by the repeal of Obamacare. And I found those videos, like those kinds of videos, very powerful because they're talking with individuals, and the individual has this like unique story that someone can more identify with. And I found that kind of video way more impactful and moving than, let's say, like a super mass produced CNN or even Vox video where it's like, these are the really broad statistics about how many people will lose insurance. Because even though it can sound very damaging to say 4 million people or however many millions are going to be uninsured, like when you see someone who is clearly struggling with like heroin addiction talking about how Obamacare has helped them individually, like that was more impactful to me. And so I'm wondering, I guess this is like both a question and like a bit of advice, like how organizations like Vice can kind of center the individual more in the way that they report and the way that they try to target people, and kind of make it feel less like this sort of like big glitzy video that is coming from this multi-billion-dollar news corporation. So I was kind of wondering your thoughts on that, like how that could work, how media can focus more on the individual in the future.
Well, you know, great question. And I don't want to sound like I've consumed the Kool-Aid for this company that I work at, but I kind of have. It starts with having, it's not like people like me, but it's people like me. It's that you have to have people in management who are going to support that kind of journalism and not go for the kind of, let's put everything in the kitchen sink into a 2-minute package, right? Because it's easier to do. You can't do those kinds of stories though when your name is Omri? I can't see without my glasses. Anyway, I wanted to say your name. Oh, great. You can't do those stories without money. I mean, we could easily find opioid addiction clinics in New York, DC, Los Angeles. I'm thinking of places where we have bureaus, but we want to tell those stories from parts of America where people don't go, and that takes money and that takes time. And that, again, back to my mantra is, if we don't support journalism in some sort of holistic way, we're not going to be able to tell those kinds of stories that you want us to tell. I worked in local news, and I created content for local stations across the United States. And that worked because so many local stations didn't have the wherewithal to go to other parts of the country, so they would take my package that I would create and drop it in their show. You see how crazy that is? We're utilizing the network of all the local stations, but a station in a local market oftentimes can only stay in their market. And that's great, but if there's a relationship between what's happening in Ohio and what's happening in Minnesota, local stations don't spend the money because they don't have the money to have their reporter go and do that story. So you end up just taking feeds. I'm doing this because once upon a time, everything was given to us via satellite. That's how old I am. Now it's just, you know, a micro card, and it's something that comes to you via the internet. I know what you're saying. Oh, there you are. The screen keeps moving. Or am I like, never mind. You were down here a minute ago. This Hollywood Squares thing is making me crazy. I know exactly what you're saying, and I hear you, and I think that we do it pretty well. But I think that the pressures upon most big media companies to make money and to get advertising support, which lessens the amount of time in a local news or a national broadcast. You think you're watching for 30 minutes, you're getting about 19 to 20 minutes if you watch an evening news program, and the rest is commercial. And that's the pressure that advertising puts on, or that's the pressure that news organizations are under because they need those advertising dollars. So you don't have enough time to really explore. Think about some movie that you love. And when you really think about it, the movie was great because there was a full exploration of the characters. That can only happen when you have time to tell the story. And what I need from you is a constant reminder that how many characters do we have in a Twitter, in a tweet? 122?
240, 280.
280? That's like that. And the same is true, you know, can you sustain watching a video for 10 minutes, or does everything have to be less than 2? Somebody tell me. Stoso? Sam, depends on the content. Okay, but on average, when you look at an Instagram video, they're what, a minute long? And the audience, okay, they're about a minute long. Is that enough time? Or is it okay that we've whet your app? No, okay. We need more time. And the only way we're going to get more time is to have people like you who want to become a part of this industry to say, I don't want to be a part of a network that's going to produce a minute 30 package. Do you know what I used to tell myself when I had to do a minute 30 package on, the Death with Dignity Act in Oregon, which allowed people with terminal diseases to end their life, which is a big deal. I had to do that story in a minute 30. Sorry about the ambulance, right on cue. If we don't have the ability to talk to people like you to say, we need you in this industry so that you can be those agents of change that want to go out and report stories fully and do explorations into pieces that are heady and full of facts, but tell stories about people who don't know about. And we don't care. Some people don't care about the pandemic because they don't know people who have died from it. I know a whole bunch of people who have died from COVID. So if we don't tell stories that present who these people are in all of their glorious nuances, but you need time to do that. Next question.
Natalie, do you have a question?
Yes. Okay. So speaking to what you were saying with the dependence on advertisements, is holistic journalism possible under capitalism?
Oh my God. Seriously? Okay. Yes. Yes. Of course it is. I mean, we have a whole bunch of wealthy people in this country, many of whom are thinking about how to protect journalism. It's a thing now, which is kind of great. I think that the more independent individuals who are enlightened look at the importance of journalism, I think that I don't think we're ever going to wean ourselves off of our addiction to advertising. It's going to play a role. It's still going to be around, but I don't think that we will, I think it's up to philanthropy to help with it, with preserving journalism. So I don't know if that answers your question, but philanthropists exist in our world because they've made a boatload of money, or they inherited a boatload of money. So I am going to say, yes, it can. And I think that we're going to see a shift overall in the way we think about journalism, whether it be online, print, or broadcast, because of what the pandemic has brought us in terms of, advertising dollars have all but disappeared. We don't have sport for them to advertise around. So I think the whole kind of way the business model of news and the business model of journalism is going to have to change in the next several years. It's already changing. So I think it will exist. And I do think it can exist under capitalism.
Next question is from Gabe. You want to unmute?
You spoke earlier about Walter Cronkite briefly, about how that was one of your idols growing up. Do you think we'll ever come to a place in America where all Americans can turn to someone like Cronkite to rely on for the news, or are we past that point permanently now?
I love that question, but it makes me incredibly sad. I think we're past that point. I don't think that we're too fractured as a nation to feel that, first, no one's home at 6:30 anymore. Everything is either DVR'd if you have access to TV and cable, or you watch it online. But the idea of everyone being home or close to a television at 6:30, that there were really only 3 networks and that they were all white men in the anchor chair, as an aside. But I loved Walter. He's the reason why I worked at CBS. I thought that I had died and gone to heaven when I walked into the building. But I think that time has passed. I don't think that there's anyone out there that could have that kind of power, and now there are too many choices. There are too many that we no longer need to have one person tell us everything that we need to know. And we can go online. First, we get our news and we consume our news so differently now. It's gone. I mean, you could look at ABC that gets about 10 million people every night, which is huge. But when I was growing up, it was 28 million people watching an evening news broadcast. And people can remember the time that, there was some assassination or some cataclysmic event, and they hear his voice in their head, and they knew where they were standing, and he took off his glasses and he said, the president of the United States was assassinated at this hour in Dallas. No, everybody, and your parents would probably know that easily. Maybe not your parents, your grandparents. No, great question. But I think that period is now, it's done.
Our next question is from Lucia. You want to unmute?
So knowing what we now know about the 2016 election and how that was covered, how can the media improve its coverage of the 2020 election? And how are you all at Impact planning to do so?
Thank you very much for that question. Stop with the horse races. I think it's deadly. I think now I can't watch. We may occasionally allude to a poll, but I think the polling information is just a death knell. It's terrible. It's not a horse race. It's a big mistake when we go down that path. People begin to think, well, he's got this massive lead, I don't have to vote or whatever. And it's just, stop. How are we preparing? Well, it certainly made life a little bit easier to have a pandemic, so massive numbers of crews, and I say that facetiously. I would rather have the conventions than have a pandemic, but the conventions are a giant time suck, and they cost a lot of money to cover, and I am really curious to see how many people watch virtually. I'm going to bank that people will tune in at the hour that they think Kamala is going to speak, maybe. Or better yet, if the Obamas are on tap, which I believe they are, on Wednesday night, they'll watch. So how are we preparing? We're just trying to tell as many different stories that are important to understanding this election year as possible. There aren't any horse racing, polling kinds of stories. We don't do that. We're trying to go to parts of the country that are rarely reported on. We're trying to make sure that we're talking to people who are apathetic and have begun to feel that their vote doesn't matter, to better understand why that is. And in the hopes of producing those kinds of stories, people who watch and listen to those individuals talk, it may be a way for us to help people engage in the democratic process. From an impact point of view, I am trying to work with as many voting coalition groups as I possibly can. I'm creating a campaign that will live on Vice, that will encourage people, and in one easy step, on National Voter Registration Day, we're going to go dark, probably for an hour. I wish we could go dark for the entire day, where if you go to vice.com, the only thing you will see on the screen is vote. And when you click, it will take you directly to either Turbo Vote or some kind of voting coalition group where you can just punch in your zip code and register. And we'll create interstitials and commercials that we will have on our social platforms, online, on television, that will try and capture the voices. Keep pointing so I can find people who have said things. But again, the squares keep moving. Tell the stories of people who have either chosen to utilize their right to vote in a way that is inspirational or highlight voices. We have this great device where we ask viewers who watch Vice TV to call in and they leave a voicemail message, and we take those voicemail messages and we turn them into content. So it's really cool and innovative and different, and I love it. I wish I could say that I had a ton of money in my budget to make donations to help organizations that are doing grassroots kind of work. I don't. So I try and make sure that I'm doing it through the content that we create. I'm going to pitch some major brands and help them understand that they should use their money for good. And it's not that they need to make a big statement about how much they care. It's make a big statement, and maybe Chevrolet donate a fleet of cars in each state and drive people to the polls. That's my big idea. I thought about that at about 7 a.m. this morning. What do you think? Do you like it? Do you think it'll work? So? Yes? I like it. I'm pitching Chevy in a week. So if you have any big ideas for the brand of Chevrolet, let me know. I think I answered the question.
You did. So I think we're at 4:13, and I know we have you till 4:15. So we have let's see if there's So I think we're gonna close out now. But yeah, we have 25 chapters in 10 states, and I'm sure there are an enormous amount of folks who will be more than happy to get involved. And I'll be in touch with you. We'll all be in touch with you right after this about more concrete things that we'll be doing together. But this was I'm so happy that you were here. So thank you so much, Marsha, for coming and speaking with us. It was very enlightening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Whoa! Excellent. How about some snaps? Thank you. You're most welcome, Maria. The questions that we didn't get to in the chat, if you want to throw those in a doc for me, Durga, and then I'll take a look. And full stop. If you guys have a big idea and you want to use the platform, think of something that, I don't want to say a stunt because that makes it seem stunty. But if there is a way to use a social platform that you think would be new and different, I can't promise an op-ed, but if there is an op-ed from Coalition Z, I'll work really hard at trying to see if that's something we could publish on our platform before Election Day. Or at least if you're doing something that's new and different, that we can do a story on. I'm not that excited about that because that's like, people do that all the time. But if there's an interesting chapter somewhere in the United States that's tackling the issue of voter apathy or looking at a different way to get people to the polls, I'm really obsessed with the idea of getting young people to, I'm sorry to say young people, that sounds like really ridiculous. You know, when you start voting, you'll realize, for some who already have, that when you go to a polling station, it's usually populated and worked by older people. Well, guess what? Those older people are not going to be able to do that this year because of COVID. So maybe there's a big idea around how we can get folks who are registered voters to volunteer their time and say to the older generation, stay home, take care of your health, and we're going to do this for you. I really think that there has to be some sort of intergenerational movement around polling, because first, we know that they're not going to be as many polling opportunities in certain states. Hello, Georgia? What could we do? What could you do? I mean, we can't get on buses and planes and say we're going to take over this city, you know, but is there an opportunity in one of your chapters where you know that voter registration numbers are low? Can Coalition Z go in there and do something that's new and different and increase the number of registered voters, and I'll get a story on you? Just saying. I'm putting it out there. Get back to me. All right?
Yes, thank you, Marsha. So we'll be in touch, and thank you so much for being here. A big thank you from everyone's in the chat, as I'm sure you've seen. So thank you so much.
you.